He announced her firing to 50 employees for lack of professionalism. But when 3 identical children called him Daddy in the conference room, his racist smile instantly disappeared. But before we dive into the full story, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Chicago, 2018. The morning sun reflected off the Michigan Avenue skyscrapers as Aaliyah Jackson nervously adjusted her simple sail rack skirt. At 26, the executive secretary at Whitmore Enterprises carried herself with quiet dignity despite the positive pregnancy test hidden in her purse that felt like it weighed a ton. For the past 6 weeks, she had been trying to schedule a private meeting with Marcus Whitmore, the company's CEO and the father of her unborn child, the result of one night after the company's year-end party. Their relationship had been brief but intense. Marcus, the third-generation heir to Whitmore Enterprises, with his Harvard MBA and Washington connections, had shown surprising interest in the secretary from the South Side. Aaliyah, who had graduated from Illinois State University with a full scholarship in business administration, saw this job as her chance to escape the cycle of poverty that trapped her community. The receptionist's voice broke through her thoughts. "Mr. Whitmore can see you now," she announced with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Aaliyah took a deep breath, smoothing her jacket one final time before walking toward the imposing mahogany doors. Her heartbeat quickened with each step across the plush carpet. Marcus's office occupied the entire top floor, with panoramic views of Lake Michigan stretching into the horizon. The space screamed old money and power, antique furniture, original artwork, and floor-to-ceiling windows that made Chicago look like a toy city below. He didn't look up from his documents when Aaliyah entered. His perfectly tailored suit and carefully styled blonde hair complemented the aura of privilege that surrounded him like an expensive cologne. "I have 5 minutes, Jackson. Be brief." His voice was clipped, professional, nothing like the warm, seductive tone he had used during their intimate encounters. Aaliyah stood straight, summoning all her courage. "Marcus, I'm pregnant. The baby is yours." The silence that followed was deafening. The gentle hum of the building's ventilation system seemed to grow louder with each passing second. Marcus finally looked up, his handsome face transforming into a mask of contempt that Aaliyah would never forget. "A black secretary pregnant with a white CEO's baby?" His voice dropped to a glacial whisper. "That would ruin my reputation and the company my family built for generations." He opened his desk drawer and withdrew his checkbook with a practiced motion. "This should cover the problem. Use it for an abortion or disappear from Illinois, I don't care which. But you and that mixed-race bastard have no place in my life." The check for $50,000 slid across the polished desk surface, stopping inches from where Aaliyah stood frozen. "Marcus, I don't want your money. I thought we should talk about—" "There's nothing to talk about," he interrupted, pressing the intercom button on his desk. "Janet, please call HR and security." Aaliyah felt the blood drain from her face. "What are you doing? What's necessary?" His blue eyes, the same ones that had looked at her with desire months ago, now regarded her with cold calculation. 30 minutes later, Aaliyah found herself in the Human Resources conference room, surrounded by executives in suits who avoided meeting her gaze. Marcus stood dominating the meeting, his 6'2" frame towering over the seated department heads. "Miss Jackson is being terminated for unethical behavior and lack of professionalism," he announced. "She attempted to seduce a superior for promotion and, when refused, resorted to emotional blackmail." "That's a lie!" Aaliyah's voice cracked. "You know that's not how it happened." Marcus leaned down, his mouth close to her ear, voice low enough that only she could hear. "Go back to the ghetto you came from, Jackson. People like you will never belong in the world of people like me." 2 security guards entered the room, their expressions impassive. "Please escort Miss Jackson from the building," the HR director said, sliding a termination document across the table. "Sign this to acknowledge receipt of your final paycheck." With trembling fingers, Aaliyah signed the paper, aware of the curious stares from colleagues she had worked alongside for 2 years. People who had shared lunches with her, who had complimented her efficiency, who had asked for her help countless times. Now they watched in silent judgment as she was branded a manipulative seductress. One of the guards placed a cardboard box on the table. Her personal belongings had already been collected. Inside was her framed diploma, a wilting desk plant, and a photo of her deceased mother. "This way, ma'am," the guard said, not unkindly. Aaliyah held her head high as she walked through the open office area, past the whispers and averted gazes. The elevator ride down 30 floors felt eternal. With each passing floor, the reality of her situation sank deeper, jobless, pregnant, and completely alone. On the Michigan Avenue sidewalk, while hurried executives diverted their eyes and tourists streamed past, Aaliyah tried to comprehend how her life had crumbled in less than an hour. The cardboard box in her arms contained all that remained of her professional identity. The check remained in her purse, burning like a brand. In the weeks that followed, reality became even more brutal. Her small apartment in Englewood, with its past due rent notice taped to the door, felt suffocating. The letters and emails she sent to Marcus returned unopened or unanswered. Each morning brought waves of nausea that had nothing to do with pregnancy and everything to do with anxiety. At a routine ultrasound in a crowded public clinic, the doctor frowned and adjusted the equipment. The grainy black and white image on the screen showed something unexpected. "Miss Jackson, I'm detecting 3 distinct heartbeats. You're carrying triplets." Triplets. The word echoed in her mind as she walked to the bus stop under a fine drizzle, her thin jacket providing little protection against the chill. Her bank account showed $237.42. There was no family to help. Her mother had passed away 2 years earlier, and her father had been absent since her childhood. The following months became a blur of exhaustion and humiliation. Aaliyah secured 2 jobs, waitressing at a diner during the day and data entry at night. Her pregnant body ached constantly. The judgmental looks at the public prenatal clinics burned her skin. A single black woman expecting triplets with inadequate health insurance. On a particularly difficult afternoon, after being dismissed from an interview for a 3rd job because her condition represented a liability, Aaliyah stopped in front of the Whitmore Enterprises display window. Through the gleaming glass, she saw Marcus smiling beside an elegant blonde woman, a senator's daughter, according to the Economic Magazine caption. Their engagement had been announced in the social section. Something broke and reformed inside Aaliyah at that moment. Placing her hands over her protruding belly, she made a silent promise to the 3 hearts beating beneath her skin. "He's wrong about us. You are not a mistake, and I am not insufficient. One day, he will swallow every word he said." That night, in her tiny apartment, Aaliyah opened her old laptop and began working on the project she had abandoned in university, predictive algorithm software for supply chain optimization. Between exhausting shifts and medical appointments, she programmed. Marcus's check remained untouched in her drawer, not out of pride, but because Aaliyah knew that accepting it would be acknowledging his narrative of her story. 3 months later, Aaliyah's water broke during her shift at the diner. Her co-workers panicked, calling an ambulance while customers stared. At the hospital, she labored alone, with no hand to hold through 18 hours of pain. 3 identical boys, the nurse announced, bringing the tiny bundles to Aaliyah's bedside. All healthy despite their low birth weight. Tears streamed down Aaliyah's face as she looked at her sons for the first time. Their skin was a shade lighter than hers, and when they briefly opened their eyes, she gasped at the unmistakable Whitmore blue staring back at her. "What will you name them?" the nurse asked, clipboard ready. Aaliyah looked at her 3 perfect boys, each weighing just over 4 pounds. Malcolm, Martin, and Marcus Jr. The nurse raised an eyebrow at the last name but said nothing as she wrote them down. That night, alone in the hospital room with her 3 sleeping sons, Aaliyah made another promise. "I will build something so magnificent that one day he'll realize what he threw away, and when that day comes, we'll be untouchable." 2 days later, she was discharged with clear instructions for premature infant care but no clear path forward. Standing outside the hospital entrance with 3 newborns and nowhere to go, Aaliyah felt the crushing weight of her circumstances. Her phone buzzed with a notification. A startup incubator in Oakland was accepting applications for innovative tech projects. The deadline was in 2 weeks. Looking down at her sons, Aaliyah made a decision. "We're going to California, boys. Chicago has nothing left for us." With her remaining savings, she purchased 4 bus tickets, a grueling 3-day journey across the country with newborn triplets. Fellow passengers alternated between offering help and judgment. An elderly woman sitting across the aisle whispered loudly to her companion, "3 babies and no ring. What's wrong with young people today?" Aaliyah pretended not to hear, focusing instead on the coding problems she was solving in her mind while nursing Malcolm. Her path was clear now. She would transform her university project into a viable business, something that would provide for her sons and reclaim her dignity. Oakland greeted them with fog and uncertainty. The tiny studio apartment she could afford was in a neighborhood where sirens served as nightly lullabies. While the triplets slept in a second-hand crib crammed into the corner, Aaliyah worked through the night, building her algorithm line by painstaking line. "This is just temporary," she whispered to her sleeping sons. "One day you'll have rooms of your own in a house with a garden, I promise." During the day, she cared for the boys, changing diapers and preparing formula with assembly line efficiency. During their brief naps, she refined her business plan. At night, when they finally slept for longer stretches, she programmed until her eyes burned. The $50,000 check remained in an envelope, tucked inside her single suitcase, a reminder of what Marcus thought she was worth. 6 months later, Aaliyah submitted her completed application to the startup incubator, along with a working prototype of her supply chain optimization software. The video conference interview was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon. That morning, she dressed in her only professional outfit, the same skirt and blouse she had worn the day Marcus had thrown her out. She arranged the apartment so that only the cleanest corner would be visible on camera. The triplets, now rolling over and babbling, were placed in their crib with toys, just out of frame. "Please stay quiet just for 30 minutes, she begged them, knowing it was an impossible request for 6-month-olds. The interview began well. Her algorithm impressed the panel of investors, who nodded appreciatively as she explained its potential applications. Then, just as she was answering a crucial question about scalability, Martin began to cry. The other 2 quickly joined in a chorus of wails. The lead investor frowned. "Are those children?" Aaliyah's heart sank. This was it, her one chance, ruined. But instead of making excuses, she made a choice. "Yes, those are my triplet sons. I've been developing this software while raising them alone after their father abandoned us. If I can create this level of innovation under these circumstances, imagine what I could do with proper resources." A surprised silence followed, then one investor laughed. "Now that's what I call hustle. Tell us more about your long-term vision, Ms. Jackson." 2 weeks later, the notification arrived. She had been awarded $75,000 in seed funding. While Chicago was now far behind her, Aaliyah knew that one day she would return, not as a humiliated secretary carrying a cardboard box, but as someone who couldn't be ignored or dismissed. And when that day came, Marcus Whitmore would learn exactly what he had thrown away. As Aaliyah protected her growing belly from Chicago's freezing rain, she couldn't imagine that in just 5 years she would be returning to the city in her own private jet, commanding a billion-dollar empire built with her extraordinary mind, ready for a reckoning that would shake the foundations of the American corporate world. The $75,000 that seemed like a fortune that night would be an insignificant sum 5 years later, when Phoenix Digital would command billions, and Aaliyah Jackson would be mentioned in the same breath as Jobs, Musk, and Bezos. But tonight, staring at the notification email, Aaliyah couldn't see that far ahead. The only future she could envision was surviving the next day, and the day after that. The triplets, now barely a month old, slept in the second-hand crib she'd purchased from a thrift store, their tiny bodies barely taking up half the space designed for a single infant. The following morning brought harsh reality back into focus. The landlord's notice was still taped to her apartment door. Rent due. Final warning. She had exactly 17 days to come up with the money before eviction proceedings would begin. The seed funding wouldn't be dispersed for at least 3 weeks. Aaliyah adjusted her waitress uniform, already tight across her postpartum body, wincing as the fabric pressed against her still sensitive chest. 6 weeks after giving birth to triplets, she shouldn't have been working at all, let alone standing for 8-hour shifts. But motherhood had obliterated the luxury of should. "You're late again, Jackson," her manager at Sunshine Diner barked as she hurried through the back entrance. His eyes narrowed at her disheveled appearance. "Third time this week, one more and I'll have to let you go." "I'm sorry, Mr. Delaney. The babysitter was late and I had to save it. Table 7's been waiting 10 minutes for coffee." He turned away, muttering something about hiring single mothers that Aaliyah pretended not to hear. The morning rush was merciless. Impatient customers snapped their fingers for refills while Aaliyah's back screamed in protest with every movement. A businessman in an expensive suit complained loudly when she was too slow bringing his eggs, making a point of leaving no tip. "Just like that, Marcus," she thought bitterly, carrying plates to another table. Men in suits who believed their time and comfort mattered more than her humanity. By noon, nausea and dizziness threatened to overwhelm her. During her brief break, she called the elderly neighbor who watched the triplets. "They're fussy today," Mrs. Rodriguez reported. "The little one, Malcolm, right? He seems to have a fever." Aaliyah's chest tightened with panic. "How high?" "Not too bad, but he's warmer than the others." "I'll be home as soon as my shift ends. Please call if it gets worse." She hung up, heart racing. A sick baby meant doctor visits she couldn't afford. The clinic was backlogged for weeks, and the emergency room would cost hundreds she didn't have. "Break's over, Jackson!" Mr. Delaney shouted from the kitchen. As she stood to return to the floor, a sharp pain shot through her abdomen, forcing her to grab the wall for support. Her body, still healing from delivering 3 humans, was sending desperate signals to rest. Signals she had no choice but to ignore. The afternoon crawled by in a haze of pain and worry. When her shift finally ended at 4, Aaliyah practically ran the 8 blocks to her apartment, her breasts painful and leaking as her body responded to the hours away from the babies. Mrs. Rodriguez met her at the door, concern etched on her weathered face. "Malcolm's fever is down, but none of them have eaten much." Inside the studio apartment, barely 500 square feet of space, the air was thick with the smell of diapers and formula. The triplets lay in their shared crib, Malcolm's face flushed, Martin and Marcus Jr. squirming restlessly. "Thank you for watching them," Aaliyah said, counting out $25, money she couldn't spare but had to pay. After Mrs. Rodriguez left, Aaliyah sank onto the edge of her futon, unbuttoning her uniform to nurse Malcolm first. As he latched on hungrily, she checked her phone for messages from potential employers. She had applied for a third job, data entry she could do from home, but the notification was a rejection. "While your qualifications are impressive, your current situation presents operational concerns for our team." Her situation: 3 newborns and no partner. The corporate euphemism for "we don't hire desperate single mothers." When Malcolm finished nursing, she moved on to Martin, then Marcus Jr. By the time all 3 were fed, changed, and settled, it was nearly 7 in the evening, and Aaliyah had exactly 45 minutes before she needed to leave for her night job as a data entry clerk at a medical billing company. Exhaustion pulled at her like physical gravity. She hadn't slept more than 2 consecutive hours since the triplets were born. The C-section incision still ached when she moved too quickly. The doctor had warned her to rest for at least 8 weeks, advice that might as well have been delivered in a foreign language for all its practicality. Mrs. Rodriguez returned at 7:30 to watch the babies overnight, another $30 Aaliyah couldn't afford but had to spend. The elderly woman's kindness was the only thing standing between Aaliyah and complete collapse. "You can't keep going like this," Mrs. Rodriguez said gently, noting the dark circles under Aaliyah's eyes. "You'll make yourself sick." "Just until the funding comes through," Aaliyah promised, though both women knew that even $75,000 wouldn't last long with 3 infants in one of America's most expensive regions. The night shift at MedCorp Data Services was marginally better than the diner. At least she could sit down, but the fluorescent lighting and mind-numbing repetition of entering patient codes took its own toll. Her supervisor, a pinch-faced woman named Glenda, monitored every keystroke and bathroom break. "Your numbers are down 15% from last week, Jackson," Glenda announced during midnight evaluation. "We need consistent performance, not excuses." Aaliyah nodded, not bothering to explain that she had delivered triplets 6 weeks ago and was operating on negative sleep. Explanations were just targets for dismissal in this environment. By 4 in the morning, when her shift ended, Aaliyah's vision was blurring from fatigue. The night bus was nearly empty, just her and a few other graveyard shift workers heading home to catch a few hours of sleep before the cycle began again. Back at the apartment, she paid Mrs. Rodriguez, who reported that Malcolm's fever had returned briefly but broke after some infant Tylenol. All 3 had woken twice for feeding. Aaliyah thanked her, waited until the door closed, then sank to the floor, silent tears streaming down her face. This wasn't sustainable. Her body was failing. Her bank account was emptying faster than she could fill it. The promise of the incubator funding seemed distant and abstract compared to the immediate reality of 3 hungry mouths and mounting bills. The landlord's notice mocked her from the door. The rejection emails accumulated in her inbox. The calendar marked days until the $75,000 would arrive, assuming nothing went wrong with the paperwork. In this moment of absolute desolation, Aaliyah's gaze fell on her laptop, the same one she'd used to develop her supply chain algorithm. With trembling hands, she opened it, navigating to a folder labeled Phoenix Project. For the next hour, as dawn broke over Oakland, she refined her code, squeezing in improvements between feeding the now waking triplets. Something about the work centered her, reminded her of who she was beyond the exhausted, struggling mother the world now saw. Sunday arrived, her only day without shifts at either job. Aaliyah packed the triplets into their second-hand stroller and walked 3 blocks to a cafe with free Wi-Fi. The barista raised his eyebrows at the sight of 3 identical infants but said nothing as Aaliyah ordered the cheapest item on the menu, a plain black coffee, to justify occupying a table for hours. With the stroller positioned beside her, she opened her laptop and began researching tech incubators and venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. The triplets, now 7 weeks old, drew curious glances from other patrons, some smiling, others whispering judgments she pretended not to hear. "Are they all yours?" A woman at the next table finally asked, the unspoken question. "Where is their father?" "Hanging in the air." "Yes," Aaliyah answered simply, not elaborating. The woman's gaze lingered on the baby's complexions, then on Aaliyah's ringless finger, before she turned away with a barely concealed humph. These small humiliations had become as routine as diaper changes. The assumptions, the judgment, the way strangers felt entitled to question her choices or circumstances. Sometimes Aaliyah wondered if Marcus had been right. Perhaps people like her didn't belong in the worlds she aspired to enter. Then she would look at her sons, at Malcolm's determined expressions, Martin's curious eyes, Marcus Jr.'s thoughtful gaze, and remember that she wasn't fighting just for herself anymore. By the time the cafe closed at 7, Aaliyah had compiled a list of 30 potential investors and 10 tech meetups where she might make connections. She had also responded to 3 different landlords about more affordable apartments in Oakland's less desirable neighborhoods. The following weeks blurred together in an endless cycle of diaper changes, feeding schedules, work shifts, and coding sessions stolen during the precious minutes when all 3 babies napped simultaneously. When the incubator funding finally arrived, Aaliyah immediately paid 2 months' rent in advance and purchased supplies she had been desperately needing: a breast pump, formula supplements, diapers in bulk. At 3 months postpartum, she received another devastating blow. The diner was cutting staff, and as the newest hire, Aaliyah was the first to go. Mr. Delaney couldn't even look her in the eye as he handed her the final paycheck. "You've got a lot on your plate," he said awkwardly. "Maybe it's for the best." That night, as the triplets slept fitfully, Aaliyah sat in the glow of her laptop screen, watching her carefully constructed budget crumble. Even with the incubator funding, she couldn't sustain 3 growing babies on just the data entry income. The childcare costs alone would consume most of her paycheck. The manila envelope containing Marcus's check sat in her drawer, untouched. $50,000 would solve her immediate problems. It would buy her time to develop her software without working night shifts. It would mean better nutrition, better housing, maybe even proper health care. But accepting that money meant accepting his narrative, that she and her children were problems to be solved with cash, inconveniences to be paid to disappear. It meant acknowledging that he had the power to define their worth. Aaliyah slid the envelope back into the drawer unopened. Instead, she pulled up the public library's schedule. They offered free childcare for 2 hours on Tuesdays and Thursdays, while parents used the computers. It wasn't much, but it was something. She would use those hours to refine her business plan and seek additional funding. When the triplets turned 4 months old, they had their first doctor's appointment that wasn't covered by emergency postpartum care. The pediatrician's office required a $200 deposit before seeing them, money Aaliyah had to pull from her dwindling savings. "They're doing remarkably well," the doctor noted, examining each baby in turn. "Still on the small side, but their development is on track. You're doing an excellent job, Ms. Jackson." The validation, the first she'd received in months, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Is their father involved at all?" the doctor asked, updating their charts. "No." The doctor nodded without judgment. "There are some resources for single parents that might help. I'll have the nurse print information for you." The resources turned out to be food banks, diaper drives, and support groups that met during hours Aaliyah worked. Still, she tucked the papers carefully into her bag. Every small help mattered now. That night, she updated her Phoenix Project code, implementing improvements based on research she'd done at the library. The algorithm was becoming more sophisticated, more valuable. In the harsh glow of the laptop screen, with 3 sleeping babies beside her and bills piled on the counter, Aaliyah allowed herself to imagine a different future, one where her creation provided not just survival, but prosperity. At 5 months, the triplets began showing distinct personalities. Malcolm was the bold one, always reaching for new objects. Martin watched everything with intense focus. Marcus Jr., the smallest, was quiet and observant, his eyes, so like his father's, taking in the world with apparent consideration. When they reached 6 months, Aaliyah made a decision. The data entry job was barely covering expenses, and the hours away from her sons felt increasingly painful. With trembling fingers, she typed her resignation email, then opened a new document. Phoenix Digital Solutions, Business Plan. For the next week, she lived on instant noodles and coffee, coding during naps and after bedtime, refining her pitch deck for potential investors. The incubator would provide another showcase in 2 months. She needed to have a more advanced prototype by then. On a rainy Tuesday, while the triplets napped in their crib, now becoming crowded as they grew, Aaliyah looked out at the Oakland streets below her window. Somewhere out there was the future she was fighting for. Somewhere beyond the struggle and exhaustion was a world where her sons would never know the humiliation she had endured, where they would never be deemed insufficient by men like Marcus Whitmore. The $75,000 that seemed like a fortune that night would be an insignificant sum 5 years later, when Phoenix Digital would command billions and Aaliyah Jackson would be mentioned in the same breath as Jobs, Musk, and Bezos. The rain pounded against the thin windows of Aaliyah's Oakland apartment as she stared at the eviction notice in her hand. 3 months had passed since the incubator funding, and despite her careful budgeting, the money was nearly gone. Silicon Valley's merciless cost of living had consumed most of it, leaving her with difficult choices that seemed to multiply by the day. Final warning before legal proceedings, the notice stated in bold red letters. Aaliyah glanced at the 3 babies, now 6 months old, who shared the second-hand crib in the corner of her studio apartment. Malcolm was teething, his face flushed with discomfort. Martin and Marcus Jr. slept fitfully, as if sensing their mother's distress. She had less than 48 hours to decide, pay the rent or purchase the computer components she needed to complete her prototype. Either choice meant sacrificing something essential. A knock at the door startled her. Mrs. Rodriguez, her elderly neighbor who had become an unexpected ally, stood in the hallway with a concerned expression. "The landlord was asking about you again," she said quietly. "I heard him telling someone he's already found new tenants." Aaliyah's stomach tightened. "I've been looking for another place, but everything's so expensive and most landlords won't rent to someone with triplets." Mrs. Rodriguez pressed a small envelope into her hand. "It's not much, just $200. My Social Security came yesterday." "I can't take your money." "You can and you will," the older woman insisted. "Pay me back when you're a rich tech genius." That night, after Mrs. Rodriguez left and the babies were finally sleeping, Aaliyah made a decision. She would move to a smaller, cheaper apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. The money saved on rent would buy her more development time for her software. The new apartment was half the size of her already tiny studio, located above a convenience store that stayed open all night. The constant noise and the occasional waft of cigarette smoke from customers lingering outside were just 2 of its many flaws. But the rent was $300 less per month, money that could go toward building her future. Moving day was a testament to how little she owned. One taxi ride transported everything: the crib, a futon mattress, 2 plastic storage bins of baby clothes, her laptop, and a bag of diapers. The triplets, now nearly 7 months old, watched with curious eyes as their world was dismantled and reassembled in the span of 3 hours. That evening, as truck engines rumbled below and the babies fussed in their increasingly cramped crib, Aaliyah set up her workstation on an overturned box. With a determination that had become her trademark, she began the night's work session, coding with her right hand while rocking Marcus Jr. with her left. When dawn broke, she had completed another module of her algorithm. Progress measured in lines of code, in small victories wrested from the jaws of exhaustion. The new routine was even more brutal than before. On Sundays, Aaliyah packed the triplets into their stroller and walked 6 blocks to Wired Coffee, the only cafe in the area with reliable Wi-Fi. The first few visits earned her suspicious glances from the baristas. A young black woman with 3 identical babies clearly wasn't their typical customer. But after several weeks of purchasing a single black coffee and occupying a corner table for hours, they began to warm to her presence. "Working on something big?" asked a barista named Tyler one Sunday, nodding toward her laptop screen filled with code. "Supply chain optimization software," Aaliyah replied, surprised by the interest. "My brother works at a startup in Palo Alto. They're always looking for new tech. Want me to mention your project to him?" These small connections became lifelines. A conversation here, a referral there. Slowly, Aaliyah began building a network despite her constraints. As the triplets approached 8 months, they became more active and vocal, making Aaliyah's coding sessions increasingly difficult. She adapted by working in 20-minute increments, taking advantage of brief moments when all three were momentarily content. One night, as she nursed Malcolm while typing one-handed, Martin pulled himself up to standing using the futon. It was his first time, and Aaliyah quickly grabbed her phone to record the milestone. By the time she positioned the camera, Martin had already plopped back down, but the moment had passed unrecorded. These were the sacrifices that weighed heaviest. The milestones missed or only half-witnessed because she was splitting her attention between motherhood and survival. When the babies reached 9 months, Aaliyah faced another crisis. The data entry company where she still worked remotely was closing its Oakland office. Her supervisor offered condolences but no solutions. Another income stream vanished overnight. That evening, sitting on her futon with Malcolm attempting to crawl across her lap, Martin exploring a plastic container, and Marcus Jr. watching them both with his thoughtful gaze, Aaliyah made another pivotal decision. She would apply for a spot in a more prestigious accelerator program, one that offered not just funding but mentorship and connections. The application required a video pitch. For 3 days, Aaliyah prepared obsessively, rehearsing her presentation while changing diapers and preparing bottles. She cleaned the least cluttered corner of her apartment, hung a sheet as a backdrop, and borrowed a better webcam from a neighbor. The morning of the video call, disaster struck. All 3 babies woke with colds, feverish and miserable. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had agreed to watch them during the call, was herself bedridden with arthritis pain. Aaliyah paced the small apartment, 3 cranky infants crying in different pitches, the clock ticking toward her scheduled pitch. 10 minutes before the call, she made a choice born of desperation. She set up the triplets in their crib just out of camera view, surrounded them with their favorite toys, and prepared 3 bottles. When the Zoom call connected, showing 5 investors in sleek conference rooms across the country, Aaliyah smiled with a confidence she didn't feel. She launched into her presentation, explaining her algorithm's potential to revolutionize global logistics while reducing carbon emissions. 3 minutes in, Malcolm let out a wail. The other 2 quickly joined the chorus. Aaliyah saw the investors exchange glances, confusion evident on their faces. "Excuse me," she said, stepping briefly out of frame to hand out bottles. When she returned, instead of pretending nothing had happened, she made another spontaneous decision. "Gentlemen, those are my 9-month-old triplets," she said calmly. "I've been developing this software while raising them alone. If my algorithm can achieve these efficiency rates under these circumstances, imagine what it could do with proper backing." There was a moment of stunned silence, then the lead investor, a woman in her 50s, leaned forward. "Now that's the kind of determination we look for. Continue, Ms. Jackson." By the end of the call, Aaliyah had secured a second-round interview. As soon as the connection ended, she collapsed onto the floor beside the crib, tears of relief mixing with exhaustion. 2 weeks later, the accelerator program accepted her. The offer included $150,000 in funding, office space in San Francisco, and, crucially, access to their childcare program for startup founders. With this new lifeline, Aaliyah began searching for an apartment in San Francisco. The prices were staggering, far beyond what seemed possible even with the new funding. After visiting 12 depressing options, she found a 1-bedroom in a rundown building in the Mission District. The landlord, an elderly man who reminded her of her grandfather, agreed to rent to her despite his usual "no children" policy. "My daughter raised twins by herself," he explained. "Hardest worker I ever knew. You remind me of her." Moving across the bay felt like crossing into a new world. San Francisco, with its hills and fog, its tech wealth and visible poverty, represented both opportunity and challenge. The apartment, though still small for a family of 4, offered a separate bedroom where the triplets could sleep while Aaliyah worked in the living area. Her first day at the accelerator program office was a study in contrasts. The sleek space with its ergonomic chairs and free snacks felt like a different universe from her cramped apartment. Other founders, mostly young men in hoodies, stared openly at Aaliyah as she set up her workstation. her professional attire marking her as different even before they learned about her 3 babies. "You're the algorithm woman," one of them said during lunch. "Word is you coded it while raising triplets. That true?" "Word travels fast," Aaliyah replied, neither confirming nor denying. By the end of the first week, she had established a new routine. Mornings began at 5, getting herself and the triplets ready. She dropped them at the accelerator's childcare facility at 8, worked intensively until 5, then spent evenings with her sons, often falling asleep beside their crib, laptop still open on the floor. The accelerator's mentors were impressed by her prototype but concerned about her capacity. "This is a billion-dollar idea," said one advisor, "but investors will question if you can scale it while being a single mother to 3 infants. Then they'll miss out on a billion-dollar opportunity," Aaliyah responded, her tone leaving no room for debate. As her prototype developed, she began presenting to potential clients via video calls, deliberately keeping her camera tight on her face, removing any evidence of her challenging circumstances. "Let the product speak first," she decided. "Let them see the mother of triplets only after they've been impressed by the businesswoman." This strategy paid off when a small logistics company agreed to implement her software on a trial basis. The results exceeded even Aaliyah's optimistic projections: a 38% reduction in operational costs and a 26% decrease in delivery times. Word spread quickly through the industry. More companies requested demos. Investors began reaching out directly. Suddenly, the woman they had doubted was the creator everyone wanted to meet. On a Sunday afternoon, when the triplets were napping in their crib, now truly too small for 3 growing 10-month-olds, Aaliyah received an email from a major venture capital firm requesting a meeting. The firm's portfolio included some of the most successful logistics companies in the world. Staring at the email, Aaliyah allowed herself a moment to imagine what success might look like: an office with her name on the door, a home where her sons would each have their own room, a future where Marcus Whitmore might one day turn on CNBC and see the woman he had discarded being interviewed as a tech visionary. That thought sustained her through another night of interrupted sleep, through Martin's first fever, through the constant juggling act of motherhood and entrepreneurship. It carried her into the venture capital firm's imposing offices, where she delivered a flawless presentation despite having been up since 3 in the morning with a teething Malcolm. "We'd like to offer you $2 million for 20% equity," the lead partner said at the conclusion of the meeting. "Your technology could transform global logistics." Aaliyah maintained her composure, thanking them professionally while her heart raced. Only in the privacy of a bathroom stall did she allow herself a moment of pure, unadulterated joy, pressing her hands against her mouth to stifle a scream of triumph. Those first $2 million were just a fraction of what would come. In 3 years, investors would be competing to enter Phoenix Digital's funding rounds, and the company's market value would surpass the billion-dollar mark, while Whitmore Enterprises would begin its slow downward spiral. Those first $2 million were just a fraction of what would come, but they represented something far more precious than capital. They were validation, proof that Aaliyah's vision had merit, that her sacrifices hadn't been in vain. Standing in the venture capital firm's bathroom, her hands still trembling with excitement, she made a silent promise to her sons. This was just the beginning. The following morning, Aaliyah sat at her kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee, the sunlight streaming through the window illuminating a blank document on her laptop screen. At the top, she typed 5 words that made her heart race: Phoenix Digital Solutions, Incorporation Documents. The name wasn't chosen randomly. When Aaliyah had left Chicago, humiliated and pregnant, she'd felt reduced to ashes. Now, like the mythical bird, she was rising anew, stronger and more magnificent than before. The symbolism wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. This was her rebirth story. "What do you think, boys?" she asked the triplets, who were attempting to feed themselves breakfast with varying degrees of success. Malcolm had managed to get more banana in his hair than his mouth, while Martin methodically picked up each piece with surprising dexterity. Marcus Jr. watched his brothers intently before mimicking their movements with careful precision. 36 hours later, Phoenix Digital Solutions existed as more than just an idea. With her newly acquired funding, Aaliyah leased a small office space in a co-working building that catered to startups. It wasn't glamorous, just 2 rooms with basic furniture, but it was hers, with Phoenix Digital now printed on the door. Her first order of business was hiring an assistant. After interviewing 7 candidates who seemed more interested in the funding than the vision, Aaliyah met Zoe Chen, a recent UC Berkeley graduate with a degree in business administration. "Your resume is impressive," Aaliyah noted, "but you're overqualified for an assistant position. Why not apply for management roles at established companies?" Zoe straightened in her chair. "Because I'd rather be part of building something meaningful from the ground up than maintain something that already exists." Aaliyah nodded, appreciating the candor. "There's something you should know before we continue. I have 3 10-month-old sons. They'll sometimes be here in the office. That means this job will occasionally involve helping with them while I'm in meetings or focused on development." Most candidates had balked at this revelation. Zoe simply smiled. "I'm the oldest of 4. I practically raised my younger siblings while my parents worked. I don't mind helping with your children. I admire what you're trying to do here, both professionally and personally." By the end of the week, Zoe had transformed from candidate to invaluable ally. She organized the office, set up client management systems, and somehow managed to keep Malcolm entertained while Aaliyah coded and Martin and Marcus Jr. napped in the playpen she'd set up in the corner. "We need to create a proper pitch deck," Zoe suggested one afternoon, watching Aaliyah bounce Marcus Jr. on her knee while reviewing code. "And we should build a website that showcases the algorithm's potential without revealing proprietary elements." With Zoe handling the business operations, Aaliyah could focus on refining her software. The difference was immediately noticeable. Within 3 weeks, the prototype had evolved into a more robust platform, ready for larger implementations. Their first significant meeting with a potential client revealed the challenges Aaliyah would face as a woman, particularly a Black woman, in the male-dominated tech industry. The procurement manager, a middle-aged white man named Richard Galloway, barely glanced at her during the introduction, directing all his questions to the male intern Aaliyah had brought to help with the technical demonstration. "So, young man, tell me about the processing power required for this system," Galloway said, completely ignoring Aaliyah. "Actually," Aaliyah interjected smoothly, "I designed the algorithm specifically to operate efficiently on standard server configurations. It requires approximately 40% less processing power than competing solutions." Galloway blinked, finally turning to look at her. "You designed it? I assumed you were the presentation assistant." Zoe, taking notes in the corner, visibly stiffened. Aaliyah maintained her professional smile. "I'm Aaliyah Jackson, founder and CEO of Phoenix Digital. The algorithm is my creation." The meeting proceeded with Galloway reluctantly addressing his questions to Aaliyah, though his skepticism remained evident in his tone and body language. When they left the building, Zoe was fuming. "That was completely unprofessional. How could he assume you weren't the developer?" Aaliyah's expression remained neutral as they walked to the car. "This won't be the last time. We need to adapt our strategy." By the time they reached the office, she had formulated a new approach. "For the next few clients, we'll do virtual presentations first. Let the software speak for itself before they see me." This strategy proved remarkably effective. When clients were impressed by the algorithm's capabilities before meeting its creator, their biases became harder to maintain. Within 2 months, Phoenix Digital had secured 3 implementation contracts with regional logistics companies. The first success story came from Bay Area Distributors, a medium-sized operation that integrated Phoenix's software into their fleet management system. The results were immediate and dramatic: a 38% reduction in fuel costs, 22% decrease in delivery times, and significant improvements in customer satisfaction metrics. The CEO called Aaliyah personally to express his amazement. "We've tried every system on the market. Nothing comes close to what your software has accomplished in just 30 days. As word spread through industry channels, more companies began reaching out. Phoenix Digital's small office buzzed with new energy. Zoe hired 2 part-time assistants to help manage the growing administrative workload, allowing her to take on more responsibility as operations manager. With the company's bank account growing, Aaliyah could finally afford a 2-bedroom apartment. The day they moved, the triplets, now 11 months old, explored their new space with gleeful abandon, crawling from room to room while Aaliyah recorded their excitement on her phone. "This is just the beginning," she told them, tears pricking her eyes as Malcolm pulled himself up on the couch. Martin investigated a heating vent, and Marcus Jr. solemnly studied the ceiling fan. "We're going to build something amazing together." A tech blog published the first article about Phoenix Digital 3 months after its founding. The mysterious developer behind revolutionary supply chain software. The piece noted the algorithm's groundbreaking approach but contained little information about Aaliyah herself, who had declined to be photographed or extensively interviewed. "Why stay in the shadows?" Zoe asked, reading the article. "Your story would inspire so many women." Aaliyah glanced at the triplets playing in their new room. "My story isn't finished yet. When the time is right, we'll step into the light completely." As Phoenix grew, so did the challenges. Aaliyah needed to hire engineers to help scale the platform, but many candidates seemed uncomfortable with the idea of working for a woman, especially one who occasionally brought 3 toddlers to the office. The first engineering hire, Devin Williams, initially seemed skeptical during his interview, his eyes darting to the playpen where Marcus Jr. was napping. "Is this a regular arrangement?" he asked, gesturing toward the sleeping child. "My children are part of this company's DNA," Aaliyah replied frankly. "They'll sometimes be present. If that's an issue, this position probably isn't the right fit." Devin considered this, then surprised her. "My sister is a single mom. I know how hard it is. I'm more concerned about whether I'll be expected to babysit than I am about them being here." "You're being hired for your coding skills, not childcare," Aaliyah assured him. "Though I wouldn't object if you occasionally made funny faces to distract a fussy baby while I finish a meeting." Devin became the first of 5 engineers hired over the next 2 months. Initially awkward around the triplets, the team gradually adapted to the unusual office environment. It wasn't uncommon to find a senior developer debugging code with a toddler on his lap, or engineers taking turns entertaining the boys during crunch periods. When the triplets celebrated their first birthday, the entire Phoenix Digital team, now 12 people, gathered in the expanded office space for cake and ice cream. Watching her sons blow out candles, with considerable help, surrounded by colleagues who had become something like family, Aaliyah felt a moment of pure contentment. That evening, after putting the boys to bed in their new room with actual cribs instead of a shared second-hand one, she opened her laptop to check emails. The notification that appeared made her breath catch. Series A funding confirmed, $2,000 deposited. Zoe had insisted on champagne for this moment, and Aaliyah retrieved the bottle from the refrigerator. As she poured the sparkling liquid into 2 plastic cups, proper champagne flutes were still a luxury for the future, she heard one of the triplets, Malcolm, based on the pitch, beginning to stir. Balancing a laptop and champagne, she peeked into the bedroom. All 3 boys were asleep, Malcolm having settled back down on his own. In the dim nightlight glow, their peaceful faces showed no trace of the tumultuous circumstances of their birth, no hint of the father who had rejected them before they drew their first breath. Returning to the living room where Zoe waited with their makeshift celebration, Aaliyah raised her plastic cup. "To Phoenix Digital," she said, "and to proving everyone wrong." "Including Marcus Whitmore?" Zoe asked quietly. Though Aaliyah rarely spoke of the triplets' father, she had shared the bare outlines of that history with her closest colleague. "Especially him," Aaliyah confirmed, taking a sip of champagne that tasted like vindication. Later that night, after Zoe had gone home and the apartment was quiet, Aliyah sat on the floor among scattered toys, surrounded by the evidence of her new life. The laptop showed the company's bank balance, a number that would have seemed impossible a year ago. The business plan on the screen outlined aggressive growth projections for the next 3 years. "Mama!" came a small voice from the bedroom doorway. Marcus Jr., the quietest of her sons, stood clutching the doorframe in dinosaur pajamas, his blue eyes, so like his father's, wide in the dim light. "Hey, little one," Aliyah said softly, opening her arms. The toddler padded over and climbed into her lap, nestling against her chest. As she held him, looking at the numbers on the screen that represented their changing fortunes, Aliyah whispered, "We're just getting started." Those first $2 million were just a fraction of what would come. In 3 years, investors would be competing to enter Phoenix Digital's funding rounds, and the company's market value would surpass the billion-dollar mark, while Whitmore Enterprises would begin its slow, downward spiral. The $2 million transformed Phoenix Digital from a promising startup into a genuine contender in the tech industry. Over the next 2 years, Aliyah Jackson expanded her vision with methodical precision, building not just a company, but a revolution in logistics technology. 18 months after securing their Series A funding, Phoenix Digital occupied an entire floor in a gleaming San Francisco office building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the bay, while the open-concept workspace buzzed with the energy of 50 employees. In the center of it all stood Aliyah, now 29, reviewing quarterly projections with her executive team. "Our implementation at Meridian Shipping reduced their fuel costs by 42%, reported Cameron Way, the recently hired CFO. "They're already asking about expanding the contract to cover their international routes." Aliyah nodded, studying the figures on the screen. Success no longer surprised her. She expected it, planned for it, built upon it. Her algorithm had proven revolutionary, saving billions for companies while significantly reducing their carbon footprint through optimized routing and resource allocation. "What about the European expansion?" she asked, glancing at her watch. The triplets' preschool pickup was in 2 hours. "Germany and France are ready to launch next month. The UK team needs another 6 weeks to integrate with their legacy systems." The meeting concluded efficiently, everyone dispersing to their respective departments. Aliyah walked to her corner office where Zoe waited with the afternoon schedule. "The journalist from Tech Innovator canceled," Zoe said, following Aliyah into the sleek minimalist space. "4th interview request withdrawn this month." Aliyah smiled slightly. "They're getting frustrated with my privacy requirements." "You can't avoid the spotlight forever. The industry is talking about Phoenix Digital everywhere. People want to know the founder behind it." Through the glass wall of her office, Aliyah could see the company childcare center she had insisted on building when they moved to the new location. The triplets, now almost 3 years old, were visible playing with other employees' children under the supervision of professional caregivers. Malcolm appeared to be constructing an elaborate tower, while Martin organized a group of children into what looked like a game with rules. Marcus Jr. sat slightly apart, focused intently on a tablet screen showing mathematical patterns. "They're the reason I'm cautious about publicity," Aliyah said quietly. "Once my face is everywhere, it's only a matter of time before someone connects the dots about their father." Zoe, who had been with Aliyah since the beginning and knew the full story of Marcus Whitmore, nodded in understanding. "Your call. But the Forbes 30 Under 30E list isn't something you can easily decline. It's major validation." The email had arrived that morning. Aliyah Jackson had been selected for the prestigious Forbes list, recognizing the most influential young entrepreneurs in America. The honor required a photo shoot and interview. "I'll do it," Aliyah decided after a moment, "but on my terms. Limited personal questions, and I choose which photographs they use." Later that afternoon, Aaliyah walked through the childcare center, greeting staff members who had become like extended family to the triplets. The boys rushed to her with the unrestrained joy of toddlers seeing their mother after a few hours' separation. "Mama, I built a city," Malcolm announced, tugging her hand toward his block construction. "My team won the treasure hunt," Martin reported proudly. Marcus Jr. simply hugged her legs, then looked up with those piercing blue eyes that sometimes still made her breath catch, an unmistakable reminder of their paternity. As the family drove home to their new house in Pacific Heights, a Victorian with enough bedrooms for each child to have his own space, Aaliyah listened to the boys chatter about their day. Her life had developed a rhythm that, while demanding, felt sustainable. Mornings began with family breakfast before dropping the boys at the company childcare. Days were filled with strategy meetings, development oversight, and client calls. Evenings belonged exclusively to her sons. Dinner, bath time, bedtime stories, and tucking in before she returned to work remotely after they fell asleep. What remained conspicuously absent was any semblance of a personal life. Aaliyah hadn't been on a date since that fateful night with Marcus Whitmore nearly 4 years ago. Between single motherhood and building a rapidly growing company, romance seemed like a luxury from another lifetime. "Ms. Jackson, the Forbes reporter will be here at 9 tomorrow," Zoe reminded her as they reviewed the next day's schedule via video call after the boys were asleep. "Have legal prepare the standard NDAs about my children," Aaliyah responded, typing notes on her laptop, "and inform the team I'll be unavailable between 3 and 5 for the boys' pediatrician appointment." The Forbes interview took place in Phoenix Digital's conference room. The reporter, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and sharper questions, seemed determined to uncover the person behind the success story. "Your algorithm has revolutionized how global shipping operates," she began, recording device between them. "What inspired its development?" Aaliyah gave her standard response about efficiency gaps she'd identified during her business studies, carefully avoiding any mention of Whitmore Enterprises, where the seed of the idea had first germinated. "Your rise has been meteoric," the reporter continued. "From unknown to running a company valued at $300 million in just over 2 years. What's the secret to your success?" "Necessity," Aaliyah answered truthfully. "When failure isn't an option, you find ways to succeed." The interview progressed smoothly until the reporter glanced at her notes and changed direction. "You're raising triplet sons as a single mother while building this empire. That's remarkable. Are their father's parents involved in their lives?" Aaliyah's expression remained pleasant, but her voice cooled several degrees. "My children's paternity isn't relevant to my professional accomplishments. Readers connect with human stories," the reporter pressed. 3-year-old triplets and a $300 million company is quite the balancing act. Surely their father is not part of the story I'm discussing today," Aaliyah interrupted firmly. "Phoenix Digital's success is built on technological innovation and market responsiveness. That's what your readers should find interesting." The reporter tried several more angles to extract personal details, but Aaliyah deflected each attempt with practiced ease. When the photographer arrived for the accompanying photo shoot, she allowed only professional portraits in her office and a carefully staged group shot with key team members. When the reporter requested a family photo with the triplets, Aaliyah declined politely but firmly. "My children's privacy isn't negotiable." 2 weeks later, when the Forbes issue hit newsstands, Aaliyah found herself staring at her own image on the 30 under 30 page. The accompanying article praised her technical brilliance and business acumen, noting her mysterious personal life and remarkable achievement of raising triplet sons while building a tech empire. The photograph showed her in a tailored navy suit standing confidently before the Phoenix Digital logo, her expression determined and focused. The article generated exactly what she'd feared and expected: increased attention. Interview requests flooded in. Venture capitalists who had previously shown mild interest now pursued meetings aggressively. competitors began trying to reverse engineer her algorithm. 3 months after the Forbes feature, Phoenix Digital closed its Series B funding round, $80 million for 20% equity, valuing the company at $400 million. The investment came from one of Silicon Valley's most prestigious firms, putting Aaliyah in the league of tech founders whose names were becoming household words. With this influx of capital, she expanded operations globally, opening offices in London, Singapore, and São Paulo. The company grew to over 100 employees, with Zoe promoted to Chief Operating Officer and a team of senior executives recruited from established tech giants. Throughout this expansion, Aaliyah maintained the company's unique culture. The Child Care Center remained a central feature of their headquarters, now serving 20 children of various employees. Meeting schedules accommodated parents' school pickup times. Remote work options ensured no one had to choose between family emergencies and job security. These policies weren't just moral choices, they proved remarkably effective for retention and productivity. While other tech companies struggled with burnout and high turnover, Phoenix Digital boasted the highest employee satisfaction ratings in the industry. As the triplets approached their 4th birthday, Aaliyah began considering schools. The question went beyond education. It involved how visible she wanted her family to become. After touring 12 private schools in the Bay Area, she selected Montessori Academy, a progressive institution that valued diversity and promised stringent privacy protocols for high-profile families. The admissions director had raised an eyebrow when meeting the 3 identical boys with their striking blue eyes, but asked no questions about their paternity. "We have several children of tech executives and a few celebrity offspring," she assured Aaliyah. "Discretion is our specialty." On a crisp autumn morning, Aaliyah sat in her expanded office, reviewing acquisition proposals for smaller tech companies whose innovations could enhance Phoenix Digital's platform. A notification appeared on her screen. Whitmore Enterprises' quarterly report had been released, showing a 17% decline in revenue compared to the previous year. Aaliyah allowed herself a moment to study the report. Marcus Whitmore's company was struggling, not failing dramatically but slowly losing market share and relevance. Poor strategic decisions, failure to innovate, and increasing competition had eroded the once dominant position his family had built over generations. She closed the report without comment, turning her attention back to Phoenix's expansion plans. Her personal vindication would come, but business success remained her priority. That evening, while the boys played in the garden of their Pacific Heights home, a $5 million property purchased outright the previous month, Aaliyah's realtor called with news about another property she'd been considering. "The estate in Atherton just came back on the market," the realtor informed her. 15 acres, 8 bedrooms, pool, tennis court, guest house. Last asking price was $17 million, but they might accept $15. Aaliyah watched her sons through the window as she considered the offer. Malcolm was leading his brothers in what appeared to be an expedition through the shrubbery, a natural leader even at 4. Martin was methodically constructing something with sticks and leaves, his organizational skills already evident. Marcus Jr. sat cross-legged on the grass, watching clouds with the contemplative expression that made him seem older than his years. "Make an offer at $14 million, Aaliyah decided. "Cash purchase, 30-day close." 2 weeks later, while signing the final paperwork for the Atherton estate, Aaliyah received an email that made her pause mid-signature. The subject line read, "Invitation, National Technology Conference, Chicago, Keynote Speaker Request." The conference was the industry's most prestigious annual gathering, taking place in the same city she had fled 5 years earlier. The organizers wanted her as the headline speaker presenting on "The Future of Predictive Algorithms in Global Commerce." Chicago, the city where Marcus had humiliated her, where she had struggled through pregnancy alone, where the triplets had been born premature and fragile. She hadn't set foot there since leaving with 3 newborns and shattered dignity. The timing seemed almost poetic. Phoenix Digital now commanded respect worldwide, valued at over $300 million with projections to hit $1 billion within 18 months. Her sons were thriving, brilliant, and confident. She had achieved success beyond what most people considered possible in such a short time. And Marcus? His family's company was faltering, his reputation diminishing with each disappointing quarter. The man who had dismissed her as insufficient, who had tried to buy her silence and disappearance, was watching his birthright crumble while she built an empire. "Accept the invitation," she instructed her assistant, "and book the presidential suite at the Four Seasons. We'll be bringing the boys. It's time they see where they were born." That night, Malcolm asked the question that had been coming for some time. "Mama, why don't we have a daddy like other kids?" Aaliyah gathered all three boys onto the sofa, choosing her words carefully. "Some families have a mommy and daddy, others just a mommy or just a daddy. Our family is perfect just the way it is." "But where is our daddy?" Martin persisted, always the one to seek concrete answers. "He lives in Chicago," Aaliyah replied, deciding on a version of truth they could understand at 4. "Where you were born. We're going to visit that city soon." "Will we see him?" Marcus Jr. asked quietly. Aaliyah kissed his forehead, those blue eyes, so like their father's, looking up at her trustingly. "Perhaps. We'll see." While contemplating the invitation to return to Chicago as the guest of honor, Aaliyah didn't know she was about to initiate the final phase of her plan, a plan that had begun that rainy afternoon when Marcus Whitmore had expelled her from Whitmore Enterprises, and which was now approaching its extraordinary conclusion. While contemplating the invitation to return to Chicago as the guest of honor, Aaliyah didn't know she was about to initiate the final phase of her plan, a plan that had begun that rainy afternoon when Marcus Whitmore had expelled her from Whitmore Enterprises, and which was now approaching its extraordinary conclusion. In her sleek, glass-walled office overlooking San Francisco Bay, Aaliyah swiveled her chair toward the panoramic view, the invitation to the National Technology Conference still open on her tablet. The late afternoon sun bathed the water in golden light, a stark contrast to the gray Chicago day when she'd stood on Michigan Avenue with a cardboard box of belongings and a positive pregnancy test. Her intercom buzzed, breaking her reverie. "Ms. Jackson, Cameron has the quarterly reports ready for your review." Zoe's efficient voice reminded her that reminiscing was a luxury she rarely afforded herself. "Send him in," Aaliyah replied, straightening her Armani blazer, a far cry from the sale rack clothes she'd once worn to impress Marcus Whitmore. Cameron Way, Phoenix Digital's CFO, entered with a confident stride, tablet in hand. At 32, he was one of the few executives older than Aaliyah herself, recruited from Google the previous year. "The growth projections exceed our targets by 17%, he began, sliding the tablet across Aaliyah's glass desk. "Our valuation hit $3.7 billion this morning when markets opened." Aaliyah nodded, scanning the figures with practiced efficiency. "What about the special acquisition project?" Cameron's expression shifted subtly. He closed the door before responding. "Operation Phoenix Rising is proceeding as planned. Through our shell companies and proxy investors, we've acquired 48% of Whitmore Enterprises' outstanding shares." A small smile played at the corners of Aaliyah's mouth. "And they still have no idea?" "None. Their stock has fallen 12% this quarter alone. Marcus Whitmore's leadership is being questioned by industry analysts, and their board is divided on strategic direction." Cameron hesitated. "May I ask a personal question?" Aaliyah raised an eyebrow. "Why not just buy them outright? We have the capital. Why the elaborate secrecy?" Aaliyah turned back toward the bay, watching a sailboat cut through the water. "Timing, Cameron. The chessboard isn't fully set yet." After Cameron left, Aaliyah opened her private browser and navigated to a familiar bookmark. Whitmore Enterprises executive page. Marcus Whitmore's corporate headshot stared back at her, still handsome at 34 but with new lines around his eyes, his smile not quite reaching them. The senator's daughter he'd chosen over Aaliyah was notably absent from recent company events, their much-publicized marriage having ended in divorce the previous year. Aaliyah closed the browser and buzzed her assistant. Please confirm our attendance at the Chicago conference. The triplets will accompany me." That evening, as her driver navigated the winding roads to their Atherton estate, Aaliyah's thoughts remained fixed on the acquisition numbers. 48%, just 3% shy of controlling interest. With that final 3%, she could complete the circle that began with Marcus pushing her out of his office and his life. The car pulled through the imposing gates of the 15-acre property she now called home. 3 energetic boys raced down the marble steps to greet her, followed by their nanny, a former early childhood education specialist who managed their after-school hours. "Mama, I built a robot that actually moves," Malcolm announced, grabbing her hand as she exited the car. "I memorized all the capitals of Europe," Martin added, not to be outdone. Marcus Jr., always more reserved, simply slipped his small hand into hers. "Will you read with me tonight?" Aaliyah kissed each boy's forehead, marveling at how their personalities had developed so distinctly despite their identical appearance. At nearly 5 years old, they were tall for their age, with the same caramel skin and startling blue eyes that marked them unmistakably as Marcus Whitmore's sons. "Of course I'll read with you," she promised. "But first, I have exciting news. We're going on a trip to Chicago next month." "Where we were born?" Malcolm asked, eyes widening. "Exactly. It's time you saw the city where you came into this world." Later that night, after the boys were asleep in their spacious bedrooms, each decorated according to their emerging interests, Aaliyah sat in her home office reviewing the confidential files her private investigators had compiled on Marcus Whitmore. The report painted a picture of a man struggling to maintain the facade of success. His marriage had collapsed amid rumors of infidelity. Whitmore Enterprises had lost significant market share to more innovative competitors. The board, once populated entirely by his father's old allies, was increasingly filled with members questioning his leadership. Most notably, Marcus had been photographed entering an addiction treatment facility 6 months earlier, though the family had publicly claimed he was on a strategic planning retreat. Aaliyah closed the file, feeling a complex emotion she couldn't quite name. Not quite satisfaction, not quite pity, perhaps a cold acknowledgement that the universe had its own sense of justice. The next morning, she convened her executive team to discuss the Chicago conference strategy. Phoenix Digital would not only showcase their revolutionary software but also announce their expansion into hardware, smart devices that would integrate seamlessly with their logistics platform. "The media coverage will be extensive," her marketing director noted. "Are you prepared to finally step fully into the spotlight? The mystery CEO angle has served us well, but at some point—" "I'm ready," Aaliyah interrupted. "Chicago is the perfect place to introduce Phoenix Digital's complete vision and its founder to the world." As the meeting concluded, Zoe remained behind, concern evident in her expression. "Are you sure about bringing the boys to Chicago? You know who else will be at that conference." Aaliyah's gaze was steady. "I'm counting on it." That afternoon, while observing the triplets during their weekly assessment with the private educational consultant she'd hired, Aaliyah noticed how much Marcus Jr. resembled his father, not just physically, but in his methodical approach to problem-solving. "Your sons show extraordinary aptitude," Dr. Winters reported afterward. "Malcolm's leadership skills and emotional intelligence are off the charts. Martin's organizational abilities and memory retention are exceptional. And Marcus Jr., his mathematical reasoning is simply remarkable for a child his age." "They're exceptional because they had to be," Aaliyah thought but didn't say. Instead, she nodded and asked practical questions about enrichment activities and potential schools. That evening, while the boys were engrossed in building an elaborate structure with magnetic tiles, Aaliyah caught Marcus Jr. studying a framed photograph on her desk, one of the few personal items in her otherwise minimalist home office. "Is that our father?" he asked quietly, pointing to a man partially visible in the background of a company photo from her Whitmore Enterprises days. She kept it as a reminder, though the boys had never noticed the detail before. Aaliyah knelt beside him, choosing her words carefully. Yes, that's him. Does he know about us? The question, so simple yet so loaded, momentarily stole her breath. He knows you exist, she answered truthfully, but he hasn't been ready to be a father. Will we meet him in Chicago? Aaliyah smoothed a hand over her son's curly hair. Perhaps. Would you like to? Marcus Jr. considered this with the serious contemplation that made him seem older than his years. I think so. I want to know why he doesn't want us. The innocent brutality of children's questions sometimes cut deeper than any adult interrogation. It's not that he doesn't want you, Aaliyah said, though the words felt hollow even to her. Sometimes adults make mistakes they don't know how to fix. Later that night, after tucking the boys in, Aaliyah returned to her office and opened her laptop. The Phoenix digital logo illuminated her face as she navigated to a secure server containing her most private files, the ones not even Zoe knew existed. Here, she kept digital copies of everything: the positive pregnancy test, the termination documents from Whitmore Enterprises, the untouched $50,000 check, the original safely stored in a vault, the hospital records from the triplets' birth, and most damning of all, the security camera footage she'd obtained from the Whitmore building showing her being escorted out, visibly pregnant and clutching her box of belongings while Marcus watched from the upper floor window. Evidence, insurance, ammunition. She hadn't decided which yet. The following week, as preparations for the Chicago trip intensified, Aaliyah met with her legal team to discuss the final stage of Operation Phoenix Rising. We're prepared to acquire the remaining shares needed for controlling interest, her lead counsel explained. But timing will be crucial. If Whitmore gets wind of our strategy before we secure the final percentage, he could issue new shares or implement anti-takeover measures. Execute the purchases the morning of my keynote address, Aaliyah instructed. By the time I take the stage, I want to own his company. 2 days before their departure for Chicago, Aaliyah received an updated conference schedule. In addition to her keynote speech, the organizers had added a panel discussion on the future of technological integration, featuring several industry leaders, including Marcus Whitmore. The prospect of sharing a stage with him after 5 years sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. Not fear, she realized with mild surprise, but anticipation. The girl who had left Chicago broken and pregnant no longer existed. In her place stood a woman who had built an empire while raising his sons. Sons he had deemed a problem to be solved with a check. As their private jet prepared for takeoff, Aaliyah watched her 3 boys buckle themselves into the luxurious leather seats, excitement about their first major trip evident in their animated chatter. Malcolm was already negotiating with the flight attendant about extra dessert. Martin was meticulously organizing his travel activities, and Marcus Jr. was quietly absorbing every detail of the airplane's interior. "Will we stay in a hotel?" Martin asked as the jet accelerated down the runway. "We'll be in the presidential suite at the Four Seasons," Aaliyah answered, smiling at his wide-eyed response. "Is that the fanciest room?" Malcolm wanted to know. "It is. Nothing but the best for my boys." As the plane leveled at cruising altitude, Aaliyah accepted a glass of champagne from the attendant and gazed out the window at the clouds below. 5 years ago, she had left Chicago on a crowded bus, 3 newborns strapped to her chest, surviving on determination and spite. Now she was returning in a private jet worth more than Marcus Whitmore's annual salary, the CEO of a company valued higher than the one that had discarded her. The symmetry wasn't lost on her. When her phone chimed with a new message, Aaliyah glanced down to see an alert from her investment team. Whitmore Enterprises stock had dropped another 3% that morning following a disappointing product launch. The company Marcus had inherited was slowly slipping through his fingers, and he had no idea that the woman he'd once dismissed as insufficient was the architect of its acquisition. The zapatos vermelhos Louboutin that she chose were not just a status symbol. They were armor for the approaching battle, where each click of those heels in the conference hallways would bring her closer to the moment when Marcus Whitmore would face not just his past, but also the 3 pairs of eyes identical to his own. The zapatos vermelhos Louboutin that she chose were not just a status symbol, they were armor for the approaching battle, where each click of those heels in the conference hallways would bring her closer to the moment when Marcus Whitmore would face not just his past, but also the 3 pairs of eyes identical to his own. The private jet touched down at O'Hare International Airport precisely on schedule, its sleek white fuselage emblazoned with the Phoenix Digital logo gleaming under the bright Chicago morning sun. As the aircraft taxied to the private terminal, Aaliyah looked out the window at the city skyline in the distance. Chicago, the place where she had been broken and remade. "Is that our city, Mama?" Malcolm asked, pressing his face against the window, his breath creating a small circle of fog on the glass. "It's where you were born," Aaliyah replied, smoothing his curly hair. "Not our city anymore." The terminal staff stood at attention as the jet's door opened. A fleet of 3 black SUVs waited on the tarmac, the drivers standing at parade rest beside the vehicles. Aaliyah descended the steps first, the red soles of her Louboutins flashing briefly in the sunlight, a small, private reminder of how far she had come. The triplets followed, matching in tailored navy blazers over white shirts, their movements coordinated with the unconscious synchronicity of identical siblings. Several airport staff members did double takes at the sight of 3 identical boys with caramel skin and striking blue eyes. "Ms. Jackson, welcome back to Chicago," said the lead security coordinator, a former Secret Service agent now employed by Phoenix Digital. "The motorcade is ready. We've secured all routes to the 4 Seasons, and the presidential suite has been swept as requested." "Thank you, Davis." Aaliyah maintained her professional demeanor despite the emotional weight of returning to this city. "Any updates on the conference schedule?" "The organizers sent a revised agenda an hour ago. They've added a VIP reception this evening that wasn't previously listed. Your team is reviewing it now." Inside the lead SUV, the triplets bounced with barely contained excitement. Chicago represented an adventure to them, not the site of their mother's humiliation. "Mama, can we see the big silver bean thing?" Martin asked, tablet already open to pictures of Cloudgate. "And the museum with the dinosaurs?" Malcolm added eagerly. "And a Bulls game?" Martin chimed in. "They're playing tomorrow night." Aaliyah smiled at their enthusiasm. "We'll try to fit everything in around my work commitments." Marcus Jr., quiet as always, simply watched the city unfold through the window as they drove from the airport toward downtown. His thoughtful expression reminded Aaliyah so much of his father that it sometimes stole her breath. "What are you thinking about, sweetheart?" she asked him softly. "This is where our father lives," he said, not a question, but a statement. At nearly 5, Marcus Jr. had an unsettling ability to connect dots that others thought invisible to children. Aaliyah nodded. "Yes, it is." "Will we see him?" The question was simple, the implications vast. "Perhaps," she answered truthfully. "Things are complicated with your father." The 4 Seasons Chicago staff had clearly been briefed on their arrival. The general manager himself greeted them in the private entrance, bypassing the main lobby entirely. "Ms. Jackson, we're honored to have you staying with us. The presidential suite is ready, and we've arranged for the connecting rooms for your security team and staff as requested." The suite occupied the entire top floor of the hotel, its windows offering a panoramic view of Lake Michigan and the city skyline. For a moment, Aaliyah stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, remembering how the view from Marcus Whitmore's office had once intimidated her. Now, she looked down on the city from an even higher vantage point. The boys immediately began exploring the massive suite, exclaiming over the marble bathrooms, the enormous television, and the welcome gifts the hotel had prepared. 3 identical stuffed Chicago Bears mascots, each with the boy's name embroidered on its jersey. "Zoe will be arriving with the rest of the team in 2 hours, Davis informed her. "The conference credentials have been delivered to your room. and we've confirmed your private meeting room at the venue for tomorrow." Aaliyah nodded, reviewing the updated schedule on her tablet. "What about the Whitmore Enterprises meeting? Have they confirmed the location change?" "Yes, ma'am. They've agreed to host at their headquarters instead of the conference venue, though they did ask about the unusual request to include your children in a business meeting." A small smile played at Aaliyah's lips. "What did we tell them?" "That it was a non-negotiable scheduling necessity." While the boys were occupied with their exploration, Aaliyah stepped into the master bedroom to change for her first meeting. She selected a Stella McCartney suit in deep aubergine, its cut both powerful and feminine. As she fastened her mother's simple gold necklace, one of the few possessions she'd kept from her previous life, her phone chimed with a notification. The headline from the Chicago Business Journal made her pause. "Whitmore Enterprises stocks slide 7% amid takeover rumors." The article speculated about potential buyers, none correctly identifying Phoenix Digital as the shadow purchaser accumulating shares. Her phone rang, Cameron Way calling from San Francisco. "The final purchasing agreements are in place," he reported without preamble. "On your signal tomorrow morning, we'll execute the remaining stock acquisition to push us over 51%. "Excellent," Aaliyah replied. "Maintain radio silence on this until after my keynote. I want this completely contained." After ending the call, Aaliyah checked her reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman who looked back bore little resemblance to the scared, pregnant secretary who had fled Chicago 5 years earlier. Her skin glowed with health and confidence, her posture was impeccable, and her eyes held the steady gaze of someone who knew exactly what she was worth. When Zoe arrived 2 hours later, she brought an update that made Aaliyah's heart skip a beat. "The VIP reception tonight, Marcus Whitmore is confirmed to attend. His assistant just added him to the list." Zoe watched her boss carefully. "We could decline if you'd prefer to wait until tomorrow." Aaliyah considered this for a moment, then shook her head. "No. Better to establish the dynamic now, on neutral ground, before tomorrow's meeting." "And the boys?" Zoe asked, glancing toward the living room where the triplets were now watching a movie with their nanny. "They'll remain here. That particular reunion needs to be on my terms, in a controlled environment." The conference was being held at the Chicago Technology Center, a gleaming complex of glass and steel that had been built after Aaliyah left the city. As her motorcade pulled up to the VIP entrance, photographers clustered behind velvet ropes, capturing images of arriving tech luminaries. When Aaliyah stepped out of the SUV, there was a momentary lull in the camera clicks as the photographers registered an unfamiliar face, followed by a surge of activity as recognition dawned. The mysterious CEO of Phoenix Digital, whose rare photographs had become tech industry currency, was suddenly in full view. "Ms. Jackson! Over here! Aaliyah, look this way! Phoenix Digital, a statement please!" Aaliyah moved through the gauntlet with practiced grace, acknowledging the cameras with a polite smile but offering no comments. Davis and his security team formed a barrier between her and the more aggressive photographers. The VIP reception occupied the center's top-floor observatory, offering 360-degree views of nighttime Chicago. Executives from every major tech company mingled over champagne and canapes, deals being brokered in hushed conversations between bites of tuna tartare. Aaliyah's entrance caused a ripple effect, conversations pausing, heads turning, whispers spreading. As one of the few women in the room, she would have stood out regardless. As a young black woman who had built a multi-billion-dollar company from nothing, she was magnetic. "Aaliyah Jackson," said a silver-haired man, approaching with an extended hand. "Jonathan Reynolds, CNBC. We've been trying to schedule an interview with you for months." "Mr. Reynolds," she acknowledged with a professional smile. "Perhaps after the conference. My schedule is quite full at present." She navigated the room strategically, accepting introductions, deflecting personal questions, and establishing her presence. All the while, her peripheral awareness remained attuned to the entrance, waiting. He arrived 45 minutes after she did. Marcus Whitmore entered the reception with the confidence of someone who had been born to wealth and power, though Aaliyah immediately noticed the subtle signs of strain, the slightly too tight smile, the unconscious adjustment of his tie, the quick glance around the room to assess who was watching. For a suspended moment, Aaliyah observed him unnoticed. He looked older than his 34 years, fine lines around his eyes testifying to recent stresses. His suit was Tom Ford, his watch Patek Philippe, still dressing the part of success even as his company faltered. She deliberately turned away, engaging in conversation with the CTO of a major cybersecurity firm, allowing Marcus to notice her first. It took less than 2 minutes. The moment of recognition was everything she had imagined during countless nights planning this confrontation. She felt his gaze like a physical touch, the initial casual glance, the double take, the frozen stillness as cognitive dissonance battled with memory. When she finally turned to meet his eyes across the crowded room, his face had drained of color. Aaliyah excused herself from her conversation and walked unhurriedly toward the bar, positioning herself where he would have to pass her to reach the drinks. She waited, sipping mineral water, knowing he would come. "Aaliyah, Jackson?" His voice faltered slightly, uncertainty mixing with disbelief. She turned, her expression composed, as if he were merely a casual acquaintance. "Mr. Whitmore," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "I didn't expect to see you at the conference." The executives nearby observed with curiosity, sensing undercurrents but unaware of the history between them. Marcus recovered quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've been following your work with Phoenix Digital. Impressive for someone who started from nothing." The hesitation revealed volumes. "From nothing," Aaliyah repeated with a faint smile. "That's one way to describe it." An elderly executive nearby, sensing connection, interrupted. "You two know each other from before?" Marcus answered too quickly. "Ms. Jackson worked briefly for Whitmore Enterprises some years ago, a rather competent secretary." Aaliyah maintained her composed smile, but her eyes hardened imperceptibly. "Actually, I worked as an executive secretary while completing my master's in computer science. Mr. Whitmore certainly remembers my abrupt departure from the company." Uncomfortable silence descended on the small group. Marcus swallowed visibly, reaching for a champagne flute from a passing server. "Well, it seems you found your path," he commented, voice strained. "Phoenix Digital has quite the reputation. Valued at what now? 2 billion? 3.7 billion as of market opening this morning," Aaliyah corrected softly. "And your company, Mr. Whitmore? I've heard rumors about recent difficulties." His face tightened. "Exaggerated rumors. Whitmore Enterprises is undergoing strategic restructuring." "Interesting." Aaliyah sipped her water. "Perhaps we can discuss that at our meeting tomorrow." The shock on Marcus's face was palpable. "Meeting? Your team didn't inform you? Phoenix is considering potential acquisition of Whitmore's logistics division." She glanced at her watch, a subtle power move. "I have other commitments now, but I'm looking forward to our conversation tomorrow." As she walked away, Aaliyah felt Marcus's eyes burning into her back. 5 years ago, she had left his building carrying a cardboard box and unshed tears. Tonight, she left him speechless and off balance with just a few carefully chosen words. The name, Marcus Jr., echoed through the marble lobby like a gunshot, and as Aaliyah guided her sons toward the restaurant, she knew she had detonated the first bomb in a war that Marcus didn't even realize he was fighting. A war whose final battlefield would be the headquarters of Whitmore Enterprises in less than 24 hours. The name, Marcus Jr., echoed through the marble lobby like a gunshot, and as Aaliyah guided her sons toward the restaurant, she knew she had detonated the first bomb in a war that Marcus didn't even realize he was fighting. A war whose final battlefield would be the headquarters of Whitmore Enterprises in less than 24 hours. Sleep eluded Aaliyah that night, despite the luxurious comfort of the Four Seasons presidential suite. The brief encounter with Marcus replayed in her mind, his initial confusion, the shock of recognition, and finally the carefully masked panic when she mentioned their meeting. She had witnessed the exact moment when the reality of her transformation hit him. The woman he had discarded like unwanted baggage had returned as his equal, no, his superior, in the business world. Dawn broke over Lake Michigan, painting the water gold as Aaliyah stood at the window, watching the city wake. Chicago had once represented her greatest humiliation. Now it would witness her greatest triumph. "Ms. Jackson, your team is assembled in the conference room," Davis announced after a discreet knock, "and the children's itinerary has been finalized with their security detail." The suite's dining room had been transformed into a command center. Zoe efficiently directed staff while the legal team reviewed documents. On a secure video call from San Francisco, Cameron Way waited with his finger metaphorically hovering over the button that would execute the final stock purchases. "The markets open in 20 minutes, Cameron reported. "Once we execute, there's no turning back." Aaliyah surveyed the room, then nodded decisively. "Proceed as planned. I want confirmation before I take the stage for my keynote." In the adjacent bedroom, the triplets were being dressed by their nanny in matching outfits for their museum excursion, an activity carefully scheduled to keep them occupied during Aaliyah's presentation. "Mama, will you see us before you go to your big speech?" Malcolm asked, struggling with his shoelace. Aaliyah knelt beside him, taking over the task. "Of course. I never leave without saying goodbye, do I?" Martin looked up from his tablet where he was studying dinosaur facts in preparation for their museum visit. "Will we go to your meeting at the big building tomorrow? The one with our last name on it?" The question caught Aaliyah off guard. Sometimes she forgot how observant her children were, how they absorbed details adults thought went unnoticed. "Yes, you'll come with me tomorrow." She kept her voice neutral. "It's an important meeting." Marcus Jr., already dressed and sitting quietly on the edge of the bed, asked the question she had been anticipating. "Is our father going to be there?" Aaliyah met his searching gaze, those painfully familiar blue eyes that mirrored Marcus Whitmore's. "Yes, he will." "Does he know we're coming?" The child's perception was unsettling. "He will soon." Aaliyah smoothed his collar, her touch gentle despite the steel in her spine. "Now, I want you all to have a wonderful time at the museum. Learn everything you can about those dinosaurs because I want to hear all about it tonight." The Chicago Technology Center main auditorium was filled beyond capacity for Aaliyah's keynote address. Over 2,000 industry professionals, investors, and media representatives created a low buzz of anticipation that silenced immediately when she took the stage. Under the bright lights, wearing a perfectly tailored Oscar de la Renta suit in deep teal that emphasized her confidence, Aaliyah commanded attention without saying a word. The contrast was stark. 5 years ago, she had been invisible to these same types of executives who now leaned forward in their seats, eager to catch every syllable she uttered. "Predictive algorithms are not just tools for efficiency," she began, her voice clear and authoritative. "They are the foundation of a new economic reality where waste, of resources, time, and human potential, becomes obsolete." For 45 minutes, she outlined Phoenix Digital's vision of a fully integrated global logistics network, presenting case studies showing how their technology had already reduced carbon emissions by millions of tons while saving their clients billions of dollars. As she concluded to thunderous applause, her phone vibrated with a message from Cameron. "Acquisition complete. 3% ownership secured. We now control Whitmore Enterprises." Backstage, surrounded by admirers and potential partners, Aaliyah maintained her professional demeanor while emotions roiled beneath the surface. 5 years of meticulous planning had culminated in this moment. The company that had thrown her away now belonged to her. "Ms. Jackson, your presentation was revolutionary," gushed a conference organizer, guiding her toward the VIP lounge. "There's someone particularly anxious to speak with you." The lounge was nearly empty except for a small group near the window. When she entered, the conversation ceased abruptly. Marcus Whitmore turned slowly, his face composed but his knuckles white around his whiskey glass. For a second eternal, they regarded each other across the space. CEO versus CEO, past versus present. Aaliyah saw the exact moment when recognition hit his eyes, followed by confusion, then incredulity. "Aaliyah, Jackson?" The voice of Marcus faltered slightly. "Mr. Whitmore," she responded with a slight nod, as if he were merely a distant acquaintance. "I didn't expect to see you at the conference." The other executives observed, curious about the palpable tension. Marcus recovered quickly, forcing a smile. "I've been following your work with Phoenix. Impressive for someone who started from nothing." The hesitation revealed much. "From nothing," Aaliyah repeated with a subtle smile. "That's one way to describe it." An elderly executive interrupted. "You two know each other from before?" "Ms. Jackson worked briefly for Whitmore Enterprises some years ago," Marcus answered hastily. "A quite competent secretary." Aaliyah maintained her placid smile. "Actually, I worked as an executive secretary while completing my master's in computer science. Mr. Whitmore certainly remembers my departure, abrupt as it was, from the company." An uncomfortable silence descended on the group. "Well, it seems you found your way," Marcus commented, swallowing visibly. "Phoenix Digital has quite the reputation. Valued at how much now? $2 billion? $3.7 billion at market opening this morning," Aaliyah corrected softly. "And your company, Mr. Whitmore? I've heard rumors about recent difficulties." Marcus's face tightened. "Exaggerated rumors. Whitmore Enterprises is undergoing strategic restructuring." "Interesting." Aaliyah sipped her sparkling water. "Perhaps we can discuss that in our meeting tomorrow." Shock flashed across Marcus's features. "Meeting? Your team didn't inform you? Phoenix is considering potential acquisition of Whitmore's logistics division." She checked her watch, a subtle power move. "I have other commitments now, but I'm looking forward to our conversation tomorrow." As she turned to leave, Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice. "What is this really about, Aaliyah? If you wanted a meeting, you could have reached out directly." She met his gaze coolly. "I believe I tried that approach 5 years ago. You weren't interested in talking then." Before he could respond, her phone chimed with a message from Davis. The triplets had returned from their museum excursion and were asking for her. Perfect timing. "If you'll excuse me, my children are waiting." The emphasis on children was subtle but unmistakable. Marcus blanched. "Children? You have 3, actually. Identical triplets. They're turning 5 next month." Aaliyah allowed that information to hang in the air between them, watching comprehension dawn in his eyes. 5 years, he whispered, mathematical reality setting in. "Until tomorrow, Mr. Whitmore." With that, she walked away, leaving him frozen amid murmuring executives. That evening, Aaliyah dined with her sons in the presidential suite, listening to their excited recounting of the dinosaur exhibits, their minds too young to comprehend the corporate chess game unfolding around them. "And the T-Rex skeleton was taller than our house," Malcolm exclaimed, arms stretched wide. "Not quite that tall," Martin corrected pedantically. "The museum guide said it was 40 feet long and 12 feet tall at the hip." While the boys debated dinosaur dimensions, Aaliyah's phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Tonight. MW." She deleted it without responding. Later, after the boys were tucked into bed, another message arrived. "Whatever you're planning, we should discuss this like adults. Please, there are better ways to resolve our past." The audacity almost made her laugh. Now he wanted to talk like adults when it served his interests. 5 years ago, when she had needed him to acknowledge his responsibility, he had offered money to make her disappear. Her phone rang, Marcus calling directly. After a moment's hesitation, she answered. "Yes?" Her voice was arctic. "Aaliyah, please." His tone held none of the arrogance from their earlier encounter. "I just learned that Phoenix Digital has been systematically purchasing Whitmore shares through shell companies. What are you doing?" "Business, Marcus. Just business." "This feels personal. Interesting perspective from someone who told me I would never belong in the world of people like him." She kept her voice even, though the memory still stung. "Your concern about my motives is noted but irrelevant. I'll see you tomorrow at 9 in your boardroom." "The board won't approve any acquisition without—" "The board will do exactly as the majority shareholder directs," Aaliyah interrupted. "Sleep well, Marcus." She ended the call and walked to the window, gazing out at the city lights. From this vantage point, she could see the Whitmore Enterprises building, its illuminated logo a beacon in the night skyline. By this time tomorrow, that logo would begin its transformation. The following morning, Chicago's business publications led with speculation about Phoenix Digital's interest in Whitmore Enterprises. None had yet uncovered the complete takeover already executed. Marcus had spent the night in crisis meetings with his executive team and board members, desperately searching for a defense against what he believed was a hostile acquisition attempt. Little did he know, the acquisition was already complete. The meeting wasn't a negotiation. It was a coronation. As Aaliyah dressed the triplets in their matching navy suits, she explained with age-appropriate simplicity what would happen. "Today we're visiting a very important building where Mama is having a business meeting," she told them. "The company used to belong to your father, but now it's part of our company." "Will we meet him?" Malcolm asked, eyes wide with curiosity. "Yes," Aaliyah answered truthfully. "But remember what we discussed? Sometimes adults have complicated feelings. He might be surprised to see you." "Because he didn't know about us?" Martin questioned. "He knew," Aaliyah corrected gently. "He just wasn't ready to be a father." Marcus Jr., quiet as always, simply nodded as if he understood perfectly the complex adult dynamics at play. While Marcus Whitmore passed the night in crisis meetings with his executive team and board members, desperately searching for a defense against what he believed was a hostile acquisition attempt, he didn't know the acquisition was already complete. The meeting wasn't a negotiation. It was a coronation. While Marcus Whitmore passed the night in crisis meetings with his executive team and board members, desperately searching for a defense against what he believed was a hostile acquisition attempt, he didn't know the acquisition was already complete. The meeting wasn't a negotiation. It was a coronation. Morning light streamed through the windows of the Four Seasons presidential suite as Aaliyah methodically prepared for the day ahead. She had awakened before dawn, spending an hour in meditation to center herself. This day had lived in her imagination for 5 years, first as a desperate fantasy during sleepless nights with newborn triplets, later as a carefully constructed strategic objective. Her chosen outfit hung on a valet stand, a crimson Alexander McQueen suit with architectural shoulders and a nipped waist. The color was deliberate, a stark contrast to the navy and gray uniforms of corporate America. She would not blend in today. She would be seen. In the adjoining room, the triplets were already awake, their excitement palpable as the nanny helped them dress in identical navy suits with crisp white shirts. Even at not quite 5 years old, they understood today was significant, though they couldn't grasp the full complexity of what would unfold. "Remember what we discussed," Aaliyah told them over breakfast, her voice gentle but firm. "Today is an important business meeting for Mama. You'll need to be on your best behavior." "Will there be other children?" Martin asked, methodically spreading jam on his toast in perfect symmetry. "No, just adults. But Zoe will have your tablets if you get bored." Malcolm looked up, milk mustache adorning his upper lip. "And we'll meet our father, the man in the picture?" Aaliyah paused, choosing her words carefully. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore will be there. He might be surprised to see you." "Will he like us?" The question came from Marcus Jr., who rarely spoke but when he did, often cut straight to the emotional core of situations. "Anyone who knows you would be lucky to have you in their life," Aaliyah answered, her throat tightening unexpectedly. Now finish your breakfast. We leave in 30 minutes. Downstairs, 3 black SUVs waited in the hotel's private entrance bay. Aaliyah's security team had mapped out every detail of their route to the Whitmore Enterprises headquarters. As the small motorcade pulled away from the hotel, she felt a curious sense of calm. The years of planning, the sleepless nights of coding while nursing infants, the rejection letters, the condescending investors, the struggle to be taken seriously, all of it had led to this moment. The Whitmore Enterprises building looked smaller than she remembered. The same revolving doors, the same marble lobby, but the grandeur that had once intimidated her now seemed merely decorative. Aaliyah stepped through those doors with her head high, the triplets walking perfectly in line behind her, flanked by Zoe and 2 members of her legal team. The young receptionist at the front desk did a double take, first recognizing Aaliyah Jackson, now a tech celebrity following yesterday's keynote speech, then registering the 3 identical boys trailing behind her. The resemblance to a certain CEO was unmistakable, even to someone who had never met the children's father. "Ms. Jackson and team for the meeting with Mr. Whitmore," Zoe announced professionally. Of course," the receptionist stammered, reaching for the phone. "I'll let them know you've arrived." The elevator ride to the 30th floor was silent except for Malcolm's whispered, "Wow," as they ascended rapidly. Aaliyah squeezed his hand, her expression composed but her heart thundering against her ribs. This elevator, this building. The last time she had been here, she'd been escorted out in humiliation, pregnant and jobless. The doors opened directly into the executive floor reception area. A different receptionist from Aaliyah's time sat at the desk, but the layout was unchanged. The path to the boardroom, the same room where Marcus had once announced her termination to the executive team, lay straight ahead. "Ms. Jackson, they're expecting you," the receptionist said, rising from her desk. "May I offer you or the children any refreshments before the meeting?" "We're fine, thank you," Aaliyah replied coolly. 5 years ago, no one had offered her refreshments while security waited to escort her from the building. The boardroom doors were closed. Aaliyah paused before them, feeling the weight of the moment. She knelt briefly to adjust Marcus Jr.'s tie, whispering, "Remember, you are Jacksons. Hold your heads high." With a nod to Zoe, who opened the door, Aaliyah strode into the room, her Louboutins clicking confidently against the hardwood floor. The scene inside froze like a tableau. Around the massive mahogany table sat the full Whitmore Enterprises board, 12 men and 2 women, all in varying states of tension. At the head of the table stood Marcus, mid-sentence in what appeared to be a desperate strategy pitch. Charts on the wall-mounted screens showed declining stock values and emergency response plans. Marcus looked up when the door opened, his practiced corporate smile faltering as he registered Aaliyah. That smile dissolved completely when the triplets filed in behind her. "What is this?" he whispered, face draining of color. "This, Mr. Whitmore, is a business meeting," Aaliyah replied calmly, indicating that her lawyers should sit. "I hope you don't mind the presence of my children, scheduling necessity." The board members stared in unconcealed shock as the 3 boys took seats with Zoe in the corner of the room, tablets already powered up. The resemblance was undeniable. 3 miniature versions of Marcus Whitmore, from the distinctive blue eyes to the characteristic tilt of their chins when curious. Malcolm, always the most observant, pointed directly at Marcus. "Mama, that man looks like the picture of our father you have in your office." The room descended into absolute silence. Marcus gripped the edge of the conference table for support, his knuckles whitening with pressure. "Children say the funniest things," Aaliyah commented with a serene smile. "Shall we begin? We have a detailed acquisition proposal to discuss." "Acquisition?" Marcus repeated, his voice unsteady. "I thought we were discussing a potential partnership or, at most, division sale." Aaliyah tilted her head slightly. "Circumstances have changed. Gentlemen and ladies of the board, I haven't come merely to propose an acquisition. I've come to inform you of completed one." With a gesture, Her lead attorney distributed folders to each board member. "What is this?" demanded Walter Carrington, the elderly board chairman who had held his position since Marcus's father's time. "Complete documentation," Aaliyah responded, "including birth certificates for my sons, Malcolm, Martin, and Marcus Jr., listing Marcus Whitmore as their biological father. I've also included conclusive DNA test results and copies of the unanswered emails I sent 5 years ago informing Mr. Whitmore of the pregnancy." The three boys, as if sensing the gravity of the moment, simultaneously stood and approached the table. With the innocent curiosity of children, they walked directly toward Marcus, stopping a few feet before him. "Are you our daddy?" they asked in near-perfect unison, their identical faces tilted upward with expectation. Marcus's face transformed into a mask of horror and fascination. His own eyes, reflected in triplicate, stared back at him with childish innocence. "Is this some kind of ambush?" he managed finally, his voice trembling. "Some elaborate extortion?" Aaliyah maintained her perfect composure. "Unlike you, Marcus, I built my empire without stepping on anyone, transformed your rejection into fuel, and now have the pleasure of informing you that Phoenix Digital has acquired 51% of Whitmore Enterprises shares through systematic purchases in the open market." She slid another document across the table. "As majority shareholder, I'm exercising my right to restructure the board and executive leadership." Marcus rose from his chair, face flushed with anger. "This is impossible. It's manipulation. It's a corporate coup." Walter Carrington, who had been examining the documents carefully, raised his hand. "Sit down, Whitmore. It's all perfectly legal. She has every right to be here, and from what I can see," he looked pointedly at the triplets who observed the exchange with confusion, "every right to bring her children to meet the empire that will one day be theirs by birthright." Marcus collapsed back into his chair, the fight visibly draining from him as he processed the complete reversal of power. He stared at the three boys, now retreating to Zoe's side, seeing for the first time the lives he had dismissed with a $50,000 check. "The board will take a 15-minute recess," Carrington announced, recognizing the need for everyone to process the bombshell that had been dropped. "Ms. Jackson, would you and your legal team like to wait in the executive lounge?" "We're comfortable here," Aaliyah replied. "But my children could use a brief break. Zoe, perhaps you could take them to see the view from the corner office. It's quite spectacular, as I recall." As the board members filed out, many casting backward glances at the triplets, Marcus remained seated, staring at the documents before him. When the room had emptied except for them, he finally looked up. "Why like this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why not approach me privately?" Aaliyah studied him, noting how the years had etched lines of stress around his eyes, how his confident posture had crumbled. "When I approached you privately 5 years ago, you offered me money to solve the problem, to abort your children or disappear. You had me escorted from this building by security while executives watched. You took everything from me in that moment, my job, my dignity, my sense of worth." Her voice remained steady, but her eyes held 5 years of accumulated pain and triumph. "You said I would never belong in the world of people like you." She gestured around the boardroom. "Yet here I stand, the majority owner of your family's company, the mother of your only heirs, and the CEO of a corporation valued higher than the legacy you were handed at birth." Marcus passed a hand over his face. They're actually mine? All 3 of them?" "DNA tests confirmed it, though one look at their eyes should tell you everything you need to know." Aaliyah's tone softened slightly. "They're extraordinary children, Marcus. Brilliant, kind, curious. You might have known that if you'd bothered to read even one of the emails I sent during my pregnancy." Before he could respond, the door opened as the board members began returning. The discussion that followed was one of the most extraordinary in Whitmore Enterprises history. By meeting's end, a new leadership structure had been approved, with Marcus removed as CEO, retaining only a non-executive board seat. As the triplets rejoined them, Malcolm once again approached Marcus, this time studying him with the unfiltered curiosity of childhood. "Are you coming home with us now that we found you?" he asked innocently. The simple question hung in the air, laying bare the human reality beneath the corporate machinations. While everyone in the room understood the complexities of the situation, to these children, the equation was simple. They had found their father, and now they wanted to know him. While the member of the board watched with evident interest, Marcus looked helplessly toward Aaliyah, who gave no assistance. For the first time in his privileged life, Marcus Whitmore would have to find his own answer to a question that mattered. While the member of the board watched with evident interest, Marcus looked helplessly toward Aaliyah, who gave no assistance. For the first time in his privileged life, Marcus Whitmore would have to find his own answer to a question that mattered. I don't think that's possible right now, buddy," Marcus finally stammered, kneeling to eye level with Malcolm. "But maybe we can get to know each other a little bit at a time." The boy's face fell momentarily before his natural resilience reasserted itself. "Okay. Do you like dinosaurs? I know all about the Ankylosaurus. It has armor and a club tail." A painful smile crossed Marcus's face. "I used to love dinosaurs when I was your age." The human moment broke the tension, reminding everyone in the boardroom that beneath the corporate warfare lay 3 innocent lives caught in a complex adult world. Walter Carrington cleared his throat. "I believe we've concluded our official business for today. The legal team will prepare the transition documents by tomorrow morning." The elderly board member looked between Aaliyah and Marcus. Perhaps the personal matters would be better discussed privately. The boardroom emptied quickly, leaving Aaliyah, Marcus, the triplets, and Zoe in a silence thick with unspoken history. "Boys," Aaliyah said gently, "why don't you go with Zoe to get a snack from the break room? I saw they have those cookies you like." After the children departed, Marcus collapsed into a chair, staring at the closed door through which they had disappeared. 3 of them, he whispered. Identical triplets. That's why you needed all those medical appointments you kept trying to tell me about. "Yes," Aaliyah confirmed, her voice neutral. "High-risk pregnancy, premature birth, 3 babies in the NICU while I had no job, no support, and $237 in my bank account." Marcus winced. "I had no idea it would be triplets." "Would it have mattered? You made it clear one mixed-race child was already one too many." The brutal accuracy of her statement hung between them. After a moment, Marcus spoke again, his voice hollow. "What happens now?" "Now. The Phoenix Whitmore Group moves forward. Your family name remains on the building because it has market value, but operational control shifts immediately. You retain a non-executive board seat as a courtesy, nothing more." "I meant with..." He gestured toward the door. "The boys?" Aaliyah raised an eyebrow. "They're not assets to be negotiated in a merger, Marcus." The news of the corporate takeover exploded across financial media within hours. By evening, it dominated headlines across every business publication. "Iris unlikely, how a rejected secretary bought the company that fired her," blared Bloomberg. "Phoenix Digital CEO reveals secret triplets with Whitmore heir," proclaimed the Wall Street Journal. In the presidential suite at the Four Seasons, Aaliyah stood by the window watching the illuminated city below while her sons slept in the adjoining bedroom, exhausted from the day's emotional roller coaster. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing, journalists, executives, long-forgotten acquaintances suddenly remembering their connection. Everyone wanted details of the story that was consuming the financial news. How a black secretary fired while pregnant had become a billionaire and purchased the company of her ex-boss and the father of her children. When Marcus's name appeared on her screen, Aaliyah hesitated before answering. "We need to talk." His voice sounded desperate. "About the boys. About everything." "I believe we said everything necessary in today's meeting," Aaliyah replied calmly. "Please, Aaliyah. I was wrong. I made a terrible mistake." Let me know my sons. We can reach an agreement." Aaliyah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of this moment. For years, she had imagined Marcus begging, had dreamed of the satisfaction of rejecting him. But the reality felt different from what she had anticipated. "An agreement," she repeated. "Like the check you offered me to solve the problem? The one suggesting I abort your children or disappear?" "I was young and stupid. I was afraid of what my family would say, what the board would think." "And now you're not afraid anymore? Now that you know your sons are heirs to a tech empire worth billions, you've suddenly found paternal courage?" The silence from the other end of the line was revealing. "Marcus, you didn't just lose a family 5 years ago. You lost the chance to be part of something extraordinary. You lost the opportunity to see Malcolm take his first steps at 9 months, or hear Martin recite the alphabet at 2 years, or admire the incredible drawings that Marcus Jr. creates at 5. Her voice remained steady, without traces of bitterness, simply stating facts. "More importantly, you lost the chance to be a decent man." The following morning, Aaliyah's attorney delivered to Marcus a formal visitation agreement, 2 hours per month after complete psychological evaluation and in the presence of a social worker. It wasn't revenge, it was protection. The meeting of the new Whitmore Enterprises board was swift and decisive. Marcus was removed from his CEO position, retaining only a board seat without executive power. The company would be rebranded as Phoenix Whitmore Group, preserving the family legacy while embracing the future. 2 weeks later, in Aaliyah's new Chicago office, she received a visit from Janet, the former receptionist who had witnessed her humiliation 5 years earlier. "I never forgot how he treated you that day," Janet confessed, now older and visibly nervous. "Many of us knew it was wrong, but we were afraid of losing our jobs." Aaliyah smiled gently. "And that's why I've come personally to ensure no one loses their position in this transition. Phoenix Digital values loyalty and integrity." "Thank you," Janet whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "And those boys, they're beautiful. They have his eyes." "Yes," Aaliyah agreed, "but thankfully, very little else." The first supervised visit between Marcus and the triplets took place on a rainy Saturday afternoon. Aaliyah observed from a distance as he awkwardly attempted to connect with 3 boys who regarded him with curiosity, but without the special recognition he clearly expected. "They're extraordinary," Marcus commented when the 2 hours ended. "So intelligent, so perfect." "Yes, they are," Aaliyah agreed, not adding that this had happened despite him, not because of him. Marcus hesitated before leaving. "What will you tell them about me? About why I wasn't present?" Aaliyah considered the question for a moment. "The truth, eventually. That you weren't ready to be a father when they were born? That people make mistakes, but they can also learn from them. What happens from now on depends entirely on you." The following week, Fortune magazine published an exclusive interview with Aaliyah Jackson, now ranked among the most powerful women in American business. The cover photo showed her seated in an executive chair, with the 3 smiling boys at her side. The headline read, "The Phoenix Who Rose: How Aaliyah Jackson Transformed Rejection into Billions." When asked about Marcus Whitmore and the future, her response was simple. "I didn't build my success as revenge. I built it to prove to myself and to my sons that we define our own value. Marcus Whitmore isn't the villain of my story. He was merely the catalyst for my transformation. The real antagonist was always a system that allows people in power to discard those they consider dispensable. My greatest victory wasn't buying his company, but creating a world where my sons will never be considered insufficient by anyone." On the final page of the interview, there was a smaller photograph. The original $50,000 check that Marcus had offered 5 years earlier, now framed on the CEO's office wall, with a simple inscription below, "The price he thought I was worth, the reminder of what I built on my own." 6 months later, the Phoenix Whitmore Group had exceeded all market projections, its stock price doubling under Aaliyah's leadership. The corporate headquarters in Chicago had been redesigned, with the child care center occupying the entire floor below the executive offices. Marcus had attended 3 supervised visits with the triplets, each slightly less awkward than the last. During the most recent, Marcus Jr. had actually sought his help with a math problem, creating a moment of genuine connection. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Aaliyah sat in her corner office reviewing acquisition proposals when her assistant announced an unexpected visitor, Marcus Whitmore. 5 minutes, she conceded, not looking up from her work. He entered cautiously, noticeably thinner than 6 months earlier, his designer suit hanging slightly loose on his frame. "The boy's birthday is next week," he said without preamble. "I'd like to attend the party, if you'll allow it." Aaliyah finally looked up. "They're turning 6. It's a dinosaur-themed party at the Natural History Museum. There will be 20 children, all their friends from school." She studied him carefully. "It's not a corporate event, Marcus. It's a children's birthday party. Can you handle being just one of many adults, not the center of attention?" He nodded, something like humility in his expression. "I've been seeing the therapist regularly. She says I'm making progress with my entitlement issues." A small smile touched Aaliyah's lips. "I'm aware. I received the reports." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them before Marcus spoke again. "I saw the new Phoenix Whitmore commercial yesterday, the one about supply chain sustainability. It's impressive what you've built." "What we're building," Aaliyah corrected, gesturing to include the company at large. "The Phoenix Whitmore Group employs over 4,000 people now. It's bigger than either of us." As he turned to leave, Marcus paused at the door. "The check, the one you framed. I was wondering why you never cashed it." Aaliyah's expression remained composed. "Because accepting it would have meant accepting your assessment of our worth. $50,000 for a woman and 3 lives you considered inconvenient." She returned to her documents. "As it turned out, we were worth considerably more." After he left, Aaliyah walked to the window of her office, looking out at Chicago's skyline. The Whitmore building, now bearing the Phoenix logo above the family name, stood as a testament to how far she had come. In the childcare center 1 floor below, her sons were finishing their after-school activities, unaware of their father's visit. They would grow up in a world vastly different from the one Aaliyah had faced, one where doors opened instead of closed, where their intelligence was nurtured rather than dismissed, where their very existence was celebrated rather than considered a problem to be solved with a check. While observing her 3 sons playing in the garden of the corporate headquarters, an empire that would one day be theirs by birthright, Aaliyah finally felt the cycle complete. It wasn't about defeating Marcus, but about transforming his rejection into the force that had elevated her beyond any height he could ever have imagined, and in the process, creating a legacy that her children could carry with pride, not shame. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.